Well, sports correspondent Ben Jacobs is here to kick things off. Let's talk first about the Saudi takeover of Newcastle United. Enormous sums of money have exchanged hands, but there's been a bit of a fan backlash. Why?
Yeah, I mean, the fan backlashes from the wider football community. The sum of the takeover was actually quite small, just 305 million, but high considering that we're coming out of a pandemic. But the wider football community and 19 of the 20 Premier League clubs can't understand how the Premier League have effectively, in their eyes, sold a football club to the Saudi Arabian state. Officially, there's a legally binding separation between the majority group that have bought Newcastle United, who are called PIF, that stands for Public Investment Fund. But in practical terms, you can't have a legally binding assurance of any separation between that company and the Saudi Arabian state, because if you go to Saudi Arabia and try and independently take any legal action, you'll be unable to. And the Premier League, over a separate issue of piracy, tried that in Saudi Arabia on 9 occasions, and they weren't even able to get a law firm to take their case. So the wider football community have backlashed because they feel like somehow, without explanation or transparency, Newcastle United have effectively been taken over by the Saudi Arabian state. And the chair of PIF, the 80% majority stakeholder in Newcastle United, is Mohammed bin Salman. So then suddenly that brings into play all kinds of questions over their influence over Newcastle, over human rights issues, and should they be allowed to take over the piracy backdrop that I've already mentioned. So fans aren't happy. And then there's the very power grab within football. Is the Saudi Arabian state using the takeover of Newcastle United to sports wash? Is it soft power? And of course, in Newcastle United on the field, going to be a threat to all of these other football clubs as well.
Well, let's talk about sports washing, actually, because this is not the first time big foreign investors of dubious backgrounds have taken over English Premier League sides. What is it that is attracting billionaires, oligarchs, sheikhs to want to invest in our football?
It's the ability to rewrite history. I think when you go back 2 decades and the Premier League and other European leagues were growing, it was more a move of vanity. It was more a way of utilizing your money to invest in a side project. And we saw a lot of rich owners when football first became global doing exactly that, almost, even though it's quite a glib way of putting it, for fun. But now individuals and organizations realize that sport is a way of soft power. It's a way of strong messaging around, if we take Newcastle United or Manchester City, your government. It's a way of painting a country with a previously less positive reputation in a more beneficial light. It's a way of promoting tourism. So if we bring it back to the specifics of, say, Newcastle United, what are Saudi Arabia going to do with the Newcastle United brands? They're going to put Vision 2030 on it. They're going to promote Saudi Arabian culture. They're going to push anything that is more forward-looking around improvements in piracy, in diversity and inclusion, and so on. It's going to be a soft way of showing improvement. And if that improvement is genuine, there, of course, are some plus sides to it. But it's also ultimately a way of rewriting the past in that process.
I mean, by and large, when anybody invests in anything, there's a hope that it's going to end up being lucrative for them. Is seeing all of these, foreign billionaires investing, taking stakes in our football teams, putting an inflationary upwards pressure on all things football? Because now you need to spend about £1,000 to have a season ticket.
Yeah, I think that it's tied into demand in some respects. And unfortunately, the bigger football clubs and brands are simultaneously owned and defined by their community and their core fan base. But at the same time, they're huge vehicles of tourism. So if you look at Manchester United and Manchester City, the vast majority of people coming into Old Trafford is split between your hardcore fans that want the season tickets and your visiting fans who are effectively football tourists who will go and watch Manchester United one week, Manchester City the next week, and who follow players rather than clubs. So when Ronaldo or potentially Mbappe moves, they change their loyalty and go and buy a ticket there. And that means that you can drive up the price because ultimately you're dealing with people that perhaps buy a season ticket but don't come every week, and they might pass it on to somebody else or resell it through legal means depending on what country you're in, or they might just want a one-off ticket, and then when you buy that one-off ticket it's going to be more expensive. So as long as there's the demand, the prices can continue to hike up. And it's no surprise that as football becomes more global, the demand rises and the prices rise. And if people are prepared to pay it, then football clubs have to find a way of offsetting the huge spend they've got on things like wage bills against the income that they can draw in. Matchday revenue is actually more important to the smaller clubs because it's their primary source of revenue, and that's why the pandemic hit them so hard. But for the bigger clubs, if they want to bring in these huge players on absolutely astronomical wages, then matchday revenue, ticket prices, season tickets, the pies, the French fries you buy, anything around the matchday experience is bound to go up and has to go up if they're going to be able to afford to sustain themselves as football clubs.
I mean, as well, with having this enormous global profile and an international following, particularly the English Premier League, football's also become a hotbed of activism, as we've seen for 2 seasons now. We've got footballers taking the knee. You've got big stars such as Marcus Rashford taking on the government on what he sees as the major social issues of the day. But how does that juxtapose alongside things like allegations of money laundering about countries like Qatar hosting the World Cup? Football's got a bit of an existential reputational crisis, doesn't it?
Football is just very fragmented, and it's admirable and very valuable that individuals would be activists and athletes simultaneously. And what you actually need is substantial change from all angles, if you like. So if an athlete who has a high platform but in the football pyramid is actually quite low down the hierarchy, wants to take a stand, then they need that support from those above them in a consistent way. And the fact they've got the platform can definitely provoke change, and Marcus Rashford is a very good example of that. But if you look at an athlete with that big platform, then there's still a number of people above them in the pecking order if you want widespread change. And that includes the manager, and then the board, and then anybody else affiliated to the league, and then, of course, eventually up to UEFA and FIFA. And there's definitely at times a paradox between what an individual athlete or team or even league is doing and then the federations above them. And sometimes it's because they don't talk. Sometimes it's because there's not the right structures in place. And sometimes it's just a byproduct of the fact that football is a beast, and you're always going to get these paradoxes and conflicts. And the easy and short answer to try and address that is more openness and transparency, and potentially is independent regulation as well. And Tracy Crouch, in the context of the UK, is looking at a fan-led review to try and make recommendations of how football can be more united and more inclusive. And some of that will be about listening to fan recommendations, but ultimately football needs to talk. Football needs to be authentic. Football needs to be transparent. Otherwise, you're going to get valiant actions from individuals, with Marcus Rashford being one of those examples, but they're going to be contradicted by something at a higher level or a different level that undermines that. And if that fragmentation and that lack of openness continues, then football potentially could keep taking 1 step forward and then 2 steps back.
Ben, excellent talking to you. Football is indeed a big beast with many a byproduct. I liked that phrase. Ben Jacobs there, sports correspondent, kicking off the show.